This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Go start a website there. Hey everybody, and happy Halloween. What are you dressing as? Leave a comment down below. You know, it's hard for me to think of a series of movies or novels that have been so thoroughly dunked on as Twilight has been. I don't want to get too deep into the reasons that might be the case. I think Lindsay Ellis already did a good job with that. But suffice it to say, people seem to treat Twilight with a mixture of derision and confusion. It's so terrible, so poorly put together, so filled with harmful messages. And I don't know why teenage girls like it so much, but whatever reason they have, it's probably kinda stupid. Well, I sat down and watched the Twilight movies for the first time a few months ago, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I didn't always think they were fun or interesting. Sometimes I thought the messaging was bad.
How did you get in here?
I like watching you sleep.
What I will say, though, is that Twilight is weird. And over the course of watching and thinking about it, I've just been blown away multiple times by how interesting and thematically rich the series is. By how much I completely understand why people loved it so much. In this video, I don't want to make the case that Twilight is perfect, say that every critique of it is unfounded. Instead, I just want to tell you the general way that I look at the films, how I think they work, what I get from them, and I hope you enjoy that. So, with that out of the way, let's get started. Part 1. Agency. Okay, let me ask you a question. What is horror best at? Now, to be clear, I know that's a ridiculously broad question. Horror is a universe unto itself, and any answer I could give would be leaving out a million things. But whatever, here's what I think. Horror is best at challenging our sense of agency. Consider zombies for a second. They're these creatures who really look like us and who used to be like us. But now they don't have agency. They don't decide things. They just move around and consume because of things that have nothing to do with what they want or who they are. And in a sort of subtle way, looking at a zombie forces you to ask yourself, is that me? Do I have control over my actions, or am I also animated by these strange exterior forces? You can ask that same question looking at Frankenstein's monster or at Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Even something as basic as body horror evokes it. We like to think we are whole beings, that we have a coherent identity, but in those moments where we see a body torn apart, we come face to face with the fact that we are just a series of biological machines that we have no control over, that can break down. The use of horror elements in Twilight is often seen as a complete joke. Look, the vampire sparkles. Let's just do this accent. That's not scary at all. It's just weird and silly. Truly a disgrace to the horror tradition. But I don't think that Italian man is being entirely fair. Because when I look at Edward Cullen, the main love interest of Twilight, what I see is one specific element of a vampire brought into stark focus. And it's not that it can't go out at night, or that it's spooky looking, or that it doesn't like garlic or whatever. No. To Twilight, what makes a vampire is that it has an unquenchable and painful urge to consume human blood.
I've never wanted a human's blood so much in my life.
That it is fundamentally not in control of its desires or identity. And since Twilight is a romance and not a proper horror film, what we see is those concerns over agency being pushed onto the protagonist of the film, Bella. The first thing we learn about Edward's attachment to Bella isn't that they have chemistry or that she's cute and klutzy or whatever. No, it's that he wants to eat her, a feeling he experiences so desperately that he tries to change classes and fails to do so.
There must be something open. Physics,
No,
biochem.
every class is full. Just a minute, dear. I'm afraid you'll have to stay in biology.
he is brought into her orbit in a way that totally undermines his autonomy. And from this point forward, Edward's relationship with Bella is defined by these disempowering moments. He has to be with Bella, stay with her even though he knows it endangers her life. Despite being a so-called vegetarian, a vampire who only feasts on the blood of non-human animals, he's forced through strange circumstances to experience the greatest joy imaginable, briefly feasting on Bella's blood to save her life. He's compelled by threats from the Volturi, the vampire elite, to change her into a vampire.
Wait! Bella will be one of us. I've seen it. I'll change her myself.
Time and again, pleasure is positioned as something that he is forced to attain, something he must pursue against his will. And when we notice this in Twilight, we can start to see it in other places. Most notably in Jacob and the werewolves, the other horror-themed elements of the films. Now, again, looking at the werewolves of this series, it can be tempting to laugh them off. They're not forced to become wolves in the full moon, and they seem to have full control over their actions while in that state. None of the traditional horror trappings are present here. But coming in to replace all that stuff is a really interesting mechanic: imprinting. Once in a werewolf's life, he'll see a girl and that's it. They're stuck being blissfully happy together forever.
Imprinting on someone is like when you see her, everything changes. All of a sudden, it's not gravity holding you to the planet. It's her.
And immediately, we can see that this is producing the same sense of agency-less pleasure that Edward faces. At one point in the series, Jacob talks about an older werewolf that had to leave his partner because he imprinted on someone else.
So Sam dumped Leah for Emily?
Yeah, it wasn't like that. Sam hates himself for hurting Leah. But Emily was the one.
Yeah, I guess it sort of chooses you sometimes.
It's more than some crush, Bella. Sam imprinted on Emily.
Although I suppose this was a happy moment for a werewolf, he ends up with his true love and all that, it's hard not to feel bad about all this. There was nothing wrong with his old relationship, after all. No big reason it fell apart. Instead, this mystical, biological force just ended one relationship and started a new one. That's all. Another scene, much later in the films, gets at this idea really well. Sitting on the beach, angsty boy Jacob says this about imprinting.
None of them belong to themselves anymore. And the sickest part is, their genes tell them they're happy about it.
None of them belong to themselves anymore. What a great line, right? It gave me shivers when I first saw it because it's so incredibly sad and true. Here, the thematic dimension of the films is laid bare for us. Yes, the story is about people finding their true loves, but not in a way that we should be entirely uncritical of. At every step in the process, there is no choice, no autonomy. If Jacob is to be happy, if Edward is to be happy, it will be a forced happiness, a pleasure that is coming for them, in which they will try to fight against and fail. By the end of the series, Jacob has imprinted on a literal baby, Renesmee, Edward and Bella's daughter. And no, he doesn't own himself anymore. And yes, his genes have convinced him that he's happy about it. How genuinely horrifying is that? Part 2. Bella. So, we'll come back to these questions of agency and horror in just a little bit, but for now, let's turn our attention to the protagonist of Twilight, Bella, because, as it turns out, she interacts with these ideas in a really interesting way. The first scene with Bella that really stuck out to me was in the second movie, New Moon. It's right toward the climax, and Jacob is getting butthurt about the fact that Bella wants to be with Edward over him, as per usual, and Bella tells him this.
Don't make me choose. Because it'll be him. It's always been him.
Now, when I first saw this moment, I assumed that the subsequent films would reverse Bella's choice here to some extent. Like, sure, she's being all decisive right now, but come on, it's Edward v. Jacob, both vying for Bella's hand or whatever. It's the main thing that everyone knows about Twilight, that it has a big, angsty love triangle. So, of course, later on, Bella will feel more conflicted. Maybe Jacob is the right boy for me. Ugh, I'm so confused. All that stuff. But no, that doesn't happen. Bella sticks to her decision. And although Jacob nags her about it after that,
I know she's in love with you,
Oh, good.
but she's in love with me too.
she never really reconsiders. What we might consider the main conflict of the series is, for all intents and purposes, resolved in the second film. And the interesting thing about Twilight is that this structure, where a choice is presented, Bella makes her decision quickly and then just kind of gets what she wants and enjoys it, repeats itself over and over throughout the movies. Bella wants to be a vampire. She decides that really early on,
You all know what I want.
and it seems like the sort of thing that's gonna cause a lot of problems. For one thing, the Cullens, the vampires we follow throughout the story, keep talking about what a burden it is.
But this isn't a life I would have chosen for myself. And I wish that there had been someone to vote no for me.
Carlisle Cullen, Edward's vamp father, even suggests that he's damned for all time because of his vampirism.
I knew who I wanted to be. I wanted to help people. Brings me happiness. Even if I am damned regardless.
Another issue is that the werewolves have a big treaty with the Cullen family. That means the two clans could go to war if Edward turns Bella.
If any of them bites a human, the truce is over.
And all this seems like it'll be a really big conflict, but it doesn't shake out that way at all. Toward the beginning of the series, Bella decides that she wants to be a vampire. And after that, all the obstacles standing in the way just kind of vanish over time. The Cullens apparently have no real qualms with doing this to Bella. The treaty is unceremoniously dropped in like the fourth movie. Doesn't matter.
Treaty says.
I say, Jacob. I say.
Then Bella becomes a vampire, and she loves it. Never feels like she made a mistake. Always excited to be a vamp. There are other examples of this too. Let's just rattle off two more. Bella wants to have sex with Edward, but he's all like, no, I can't because I lust for your human blood too much. Blah, 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 blah. But then they have sex while she's a human, and she likes it. She has a good time, no problem at all.
For a human, I can't imagine that it gets any better than that.
In the second movie, Edward breaks up with Bella because blah blah blah, bloodlust, I don't know.
Bella, I don't want you to come.
And then Bella's like, fine, I'll just do a bunch of reckless, life-threatening shit until you have to date me. And that choice works, It does the trick. Edward dates her again. Nice, I guess.
Marry me, Bella.
And, we could stop here and criticize the nature of these decisions. A good argument could be made that all this amounts to the film conveying a pretty bad value system. One that rewards Bella's choice to sacrifice her entire identity to this man. That rewards her entering enormous, permanent, potentially harmful commitments in the name of being with him. That presents a sometimes creepy, toxic relationship as an unquestioned good. That treats her acting manipulatively, essentially threatening self-harm, as okay. And that's all true and worth pointing out, but here, I find the structure of these decisions, how they work within the plot, more interesting than their content. Because, on one hand, the absence of meaningfully sustained conflict within Bella's plot is pretty unsettling. We can see it as an extension of all the horrific elements I talked about a few minutes ago. See, since Bella makes all her choices immediately, since they're always the right call, since they always end up rewarding her without much resistance, it starts to feel like she's not really choosing anything at all. It's not through turmoil and thought that Bella picks Edward over Jacob or that she ends up being a vampire. Rather, all that big stuff just happens for her. We might even reasonably say it happens to her. In the same way that Jacob imprints that Edward is forced through bodily need to be with Bella, Bella does not seek out pleasure. She's simply a vessel through which pleasure forcefully operates. But at the same time, I think this understanding of Bella is a bit simplistic. Because, yes, there is something undeniably scary about all this lack of real choice that pervades Bella's arc. But it's also kinda fun. Because at her core, she is a character who knows what she wants, always.
Don't make me choose. Because it'll be him.
And then she gets it.
I do.
In the very first movie, Bella says this line in a voiceover.
I'd never given much thought to how I would die. But dying in the place of someone I love seems like a good way to go. I can't bring myself to regret the decisions that brought me face to face with death. They also brought me to Edward.
And there is something almost comical about that line, right? Because, which decision is she referring to? The choice to move to Forks? Well, her mom wanted to go on the road. What else was she realistically gonna do?
But they want to go on the road. So I'm gonna spend some time with my dad.
The choice to be with Edward? That's always posed as something out of her control, something she couldn't help even if she wanted to. Even her considerations about her own death wind up being meaningless. By the end of the series, she will be immortal. But even though it's unclear which decisions she doesn't regret, the important part, the touching part, is that she doesn't regret them.
Debussy. I don't know.
Conclusion. The world of Twilight is angsty and unpleasant and claustrophobic. I don't want to start acting like a psychologist, but it very much evokes adolescence for me. That feeling of being trapped, presented with all these promises of love and happiness and your future, but being stuck in a part of your life where your direction, the way you want to attain that happiness, is not for you to decide.
None of them belong to themselves anymore. And the sickest part is, their genes tell them they're happy about it.
But it's also somehow blissful and comforting. Bella seems okay with the hand she's been dealt. To her, the horror of the story, the horror of not having control, is not scary at all. She mostly has a good time with it. And by the end of the story, everybody is happy, whether they like it or not. In a very real way, Twilight explores and to some extent celebrates powerlessness. And I think that's a really rare and refreshing thing on the face of it. To tell a story about characters who don't gain power or express autonomy, but who instead learn to live with who they are and what they want. There's something true there, I think. Something I can relate to, particularly when I think about what it was like to grow up, how it felt to realize that lots of things just weren't in my control. And if we're willing, as we should be, to entertain the idea that these films are sex-negative, anti-feminist, goofy, Mormon propaganda, any of that stuff, then I also think there's room for a more charitable interpretation. Room to look at this movie and say, yeah, I get why people like that. So that's the end of this video, and now it's time for my Patreon question of the week and all that stuff. But first, a word from our sponsors. So a lot of people don't know this, but my dream was actually never to become a video essayist. I always wanted to start a big juicy lard business, and finally with Squarespace I have the tools to actually do that. It's really exciting. My only concern when I was starting my website is that I know my large site looks great on the internet, but how about on smartphones? But with Squarespace, that's not even a problem. You just click this little button and you see how your website looks on mobile, and it looks perfect. So yeah, Squarespace was pretty easy and fun to use, and if you want 10% off your first purchase, be sure to use the coupon code BIGJOEL. You can find the link in the description. So that's the end of the video. I hope you liked it. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, give me money on Patreon. We do live streams there sometimes. It's pretty great. Anyway, now it's time for my question of the video. Stephanie Lynn asks, if you had unlimited time/resources, what kind of movie would you want to direct and make? You know, what an impossible question to even begin to answer, because if I had immortality and an infinite budget, I don't think anything I would make would even be recognizably human. I think it would be like, every second of it would have the budget of the most expensive movie ever made. I would want to take shots of the inside of the sun. I don't even think we could be able to call it a movie as such. It would push every boundary at once and be just incredibly awful to watch, in my opinion. Anyway, that's a good question. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Mwah!